Before we get to our last speaker, and I can't quite believe we're actually at our last speaker. I feel like we could talk for about another 10 days. Just a note that if anyone lost a piece of jewelry on Sunday, we have found it. So please see the conferences team in the back of the room if that is you. And now, it is my great honor to introduce someone who I think is actually the perfect person to wrap up a lot of the themes that we've talked about over the last 2 days. He is in the midst of opening a store a week, every week, till the end of the year in China, including a store on WeChat. He has just launched a collaboration with the streetwear brand Palace in order to reach a different group of consumers. He has dabbled in experience with restaurants and coffee shops, and he is in the midst of balancing the incredibly complicated role of heritage brand and digital future. Ladies and gentlemen, Patrice Louvet.
The jewelry's not mine.
So you're pretty much wrestling with every problem that we've talked about for the last 2 days.
Yeah, that sounded like a pretty long list, actually.
Did you? And you only joined, I mean, not even, just over a year ago, right?
A year
in
and
2017.
A year and a half.
Did you know what you were getting into?
I think so. You know, I had 28 and a half years at P&G, so I had a lot of time to think through the next phase of my career. I spent a lot of time with Ralph. Obviously, it's been rocky times right before I joined. I spent a lot of time with Ralph during the interviewing process, making sure we had a consistent vision for the brand. We saw the future in the same way from a global expansion standpoint, and really making sure from a cultural standpoint it was a good fit. And so I think the whole process from the call of the headhunter all the way to when I started was probably around 4 to 5 months. So plenty of time to understand what I got into. Now I have to say it's been a year and a half and it's been an incredibly exciting run. And being here in this market, as you say, we're opening a store a week. I had breakfast with our head of China this morning. She reminded me that during the vacation weeks, we actually don't open a store. So it's actually 45 stores this year, not 52. But we're in the midst of building something I think is very exciting in this market. We are to some extent fortunate that we started late. So for many luxury companies, China is already 20, 30, 40% of their business. For us, it's less than 5. So frankly, from where I stand, it's all upside for us. We're excited about the response we're getting from consumers, right? Because you could ask yourself, okay, how does the Ralph Lauren proposition translate to China with Chinese consumers? And actually, we're getting a very good response, both men and women. And then it may sound odd to be opening stores, having just spent 2 days talking about digital and e-commerce and Alibaba, and although we did talk about new retail, millennials, and so on. For us, the headline is not we're opening a store a week, although it can be an exciting headline. The headline really is we're approaching city by city, so Hong Kong, Shanghai, Taipei, Chengdu, Shenzhen, and so on, and really looking to build an ecosystem for the customer, both online and offline, with full-price stores, with flagship stores, with factory outlets, so that frankly, wherever the customer wants to shop, wherever the customer wants to engage with our brand, we're there in a consistent and holistic way.
But do you really need that many stores? I mean, we're talking about 45 stores this year, up to 150 in
next 5 years,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, do you really need that many stores if you have the ability to reach so many people digitally?
We feel we do. Listen, this is going to be a journey, right? So we did lay out a plan that says we need about 150 stores in total in this market. What's very clear is
how did you get to that number?
Well, because back to our key city approach, and say, okay, what are the key cities? What presence do we need? How do we make sure that we have the brick and mortar points for the customer to engage? And you know, while we all are very excited about the digital platforms and e-commerce, at the end of the day, particularly our customer is looking for an experience. It's not just about buying a product. Just a little story to illustrate it. When I started with Ralph a year and a half ago, he invited me the second weekend to go to his ranch in Telluride, his double RL ranch. Amazing, an incredibly serene place. We spent 3 days together, and one morning we had an early breakfast outside, so you can imagine the view, because the ranch is stunning. The mountains, you know, it says, Patrice, see the mountains over there? That's still my ranch. Blue sky, quiet moment, and we talked about what business are we in. And we concluded we were in the dreams business. So to some extent, we think we are closer to a company like Disney than we are to other apparel brands. Because we don't believe in the fact we're just selling stuff. We're selling a dream, we're selling a lifestyle, we're offering worlds that you, as a customer, you can be part of. And therefore, back to your question on the store, for us to be able to project that, to provide experiences, we need both the digital world and the brick and mortar world to do that.
Talking about what you're selling, we just heard Cedric say, you know, one of the things that brands have to do now is be a platform for values. Absolutely. Are you selling values too? And if so, which ones?
Absolutely, we are selling values. Actually, it's the core part of what this brand is about. You know, the key values, so let me start with our purpose. We had an implicit purpose for decades. We felt the need to make it explicit for our teams and our partners. Our purpose is to inspire the dream of a better life through authenticity and timeless style. If you look at the core values that are embedded in that, it's this notion of better life and constantly searching and challenging yourself. The notion of authenticity, the notion of optimism, the notion of entrepreneurship. Those values, you know, I often get the question, well, gee, is the brand still relevant today, right? And the executions of 20 years ago may not be, but that's not what it's about. What it's about is how do we take the core values of this company that have been successful for 50 years, since we just celebrated 50th, and translate them in a way that resonates with customers here in China, in Paris, in London, in Sao Paulo. And I think what we're excited about is those values are universal and they're timeless.
But they're not political. And one of the, you know, the things the panel was talking about before was the need to actually, when they say values, to stand for a kind of political or contemporary position. So how do the values you're talking about relate to, you know, the situation of the world today?
Yeah, listen, we don't feel the need to jump into the political arena. I think there are enough people playing there. And that's not necessarily what our customers are looking for from us. What resonates with them are, you know, why do you enter the Ralph Lauren world? You enter the Ralph Lauren world as a customer because you're inspired by the story. You're inspired by the entrepreneurship that Ralph has displayed. You're inspired by this authenticity that not many brands in our space necessarily offer. I don't think our customer is looking for a specific political message or political positioning.
But that sounds a lot like escapism, which, I mean, to be fair, is kind of what Ralph offered, you know, certainly when he started. When you say the dream, it's the ability to escape into a sort of a prettier world, a better world, right, a more ideal world. Do you think really that's what luxury customers still want, escapism?
Well, listen, based on the response we're getting from customers in this market or in other markets, we actually feel pretty good about focusing on that and appealing to consumers, leveraging our core values and then translating those into experiences, into content that's engaging, that's interesting.
I mean, talking about experience, Ralph has actually had great success with his restaurants,
yes,
with his coffee shops. Are you going to bring that to China too?
Absolutely. So for those of you who have time after this, if you take the ferry and you go to Ocean Terminal, you'll get to experience our first Asian coffee shop. So in Ocean Terminal, right next to our store. So it's here. Our head of international, Howard, is here, and we are having conversations around how do we translate the coffee shop in other places. So those of you who will be in Tokyo over the next few days, we're actually opening a coffee shop in our Omotesando store and have another few locations staked out. And then we are having conversations around, well, what does a restaurant look like in Asia? Because we've actually been very excited by the response we've seen with the Polo Bar in New York, with Ralph's in Paris, or the restaurant we have in Chicago. So it is part, if you go back to what we want to stand for and what uniquely positions us in customers' minds, is this notion of experience. And how do you deliver experiences, not just through clothes, right? We talked personalization, I think, over the past couple of days. That's obviously part of the experience. What I actually find one of the greatest challenges in this business is it's not because you can do it that you should do it, right? So we're having conversations around maybe you should open hotels, right? I made a meeting a couple of weeks ago around, well, maybe you guys should get into hotels, and we got a lot of people interested in opening hotels with us. Frankly, we got a lot to do first and foremost. But the strength of the brand means, I do think in the future, we can probably translate the Ralph Lauren proposition, we have a pretty sizable home business, into a pretty unique, distinctive hotel proposition.
Tell me a little bit about the decision to work with Palace, because that would not be a kind of obvious partner.
That's not the
with Ralph
first thing
Lauren.
that came to mind for you. Listen, actually the collaboration.
Wait, do you guys know what Palace is, people?
Oh,
okay, you are just not hip enough. He is much hipper than you are.
Believe it or not, despite the suit. Yes. So Palace is a British skateboard streetwear brand. Okay, same family as Supreme, except Supreme is American. Palace is British. So it's an interesting journey because it happened very organically. The Palace founders, Lev and Gareth.
Because Ralph is a skater, secretly?
Ralph actually has a lot of skills when it comes to sports. I don't think his ankle allows him to skate right now, but if he could, he would. So Lev and Gareth actually approached us and said, listen, we love Ralph Lauren. We've been associated with Polo since we were kids, and we want to write, and I quote, a love letter to our favorite brand in the universe. So how do you turn that down, right? So it really started not through a business lens, with a really emotional lens. The Palace team actually developed the products along with our teams. Valerie, our brand president, is actually with us today, and worked with the Palace team, leveraging our core Polo items. They developed the marketing. We dropped it last Friday, and this weekend I was swamped by emails and pictures of people lining up in front of stores in Tokyo, in Paris, in London, and then we sold it on our app. If you live in the U.S. and you want to download the Polo app, go ahead, because you'll have access to a lot of new products like that. Sold out in minutes. So actually a really good, what we like about it, it's organic, right? The lens wasn't commercial. We're going to learn from it, and then we'll see where we go from here.
Did you make money off it?
Did we make money off it? Valerie, did we make money off it? Always. Good answer. I don't know, but that wasn't the objective, actually. You know, with a lot of these activities and events, it's about bringing excitement to the brand. It's about bringing a new lens to it. One of our strategies is to win over a new generation. And this allowed us to talk to a group of consumers that we wouldn't naturally have talked to. It was very interesting to see the pictures of people lining up in front of the stores who aren't customers who would necessarily line up without these kind of activities.
And did Ralph embrace the idea immediately? Did he know Palace?
Did he know? I don't think Ralph knew Palace. Did he know Palace? But he met Lev and Gareth, so he spent time with them. But Ralph is not the one that says, let's go partner with Palace. But he spent time with Lev and Gareth, and I think there was a really nice connection, consistent views of how to think about brands. And then obviously he was part of the exercise through the development.
But so how hard is it to take a brand like Ralph Lauren, which is 50 years old, which is probably one of the few brands that has had a consistent designer for 50 years. I think Michael Kors said to me, he's the only one in the U.S. Who is still firmly at the top of his design, in control of the design side, and get them to kind of think about what next. Because if it's worked for 50 years, presumably there's a kind of, impetus to just keep on doing it, and that can be dangerous.
So a couple things. It's a very good question. First of all, I think Ralph, if he were here, would tell you that he hasn't run the same play for 50 years. Right, in terms of how the brand has evolved. The fundamental tenets of core values and storytelling has been at the heart of the company, but the way this has been expressed has evolved over time. Second, never lose a good crisis, right? And candidly, this company has gone through some challenging years over the past few years. And so I think that's also been a spark for all of us to think through, okay, what do we build on from the foundations that have been established? And then what does the next chapter look like, right? And how do we evolve? So it's not about starting a new story from scratch, because frankly, there's so much that's been built in consumers' minds in terms of perceptions that it would be foolish to throw it away. But at the same time, I think we're all very clear as we interact with customers around the world that we need to evolve. Ralph will be the first one to say, I don't want to be yesterday's news, right? And he often uses that phrase, actually. I want to be innovative. And actually, you see the way he dresses, and you know, you can get very much reassured that he's in touch with today's world. And then obviously, he doesn't do all the work by himself, right? He's partnered with a number of fantastic creative leaders, some of which have been with the company for a long time, some of which are very recent. We actually brought in our new Polo women's designer from Celine. Prior to that, he was in Balenciaga, actually, doing a fantastic job. So we have the right blend of tenure, depth with the brand, and then external perspective and new ways of thinking.
Do you talk about succession?
Yeah, I do. With him, you mean? Or by myself? Yeah. Yeah, I actually, you know, Ralph, the board, and I actually take succession very seriously. We had a board meeting last week. We spent quality time on it. I guess a couple things, because I know it's on a lot of people's minds. First of all, Ralph is in.
A lot of people's minds, and fashion is notoriously bad at it.
Yeah, it's always a little challenging, right? So Ralph is in, right? He's engaged. You mentioned it. So that's the good news. He's engaged. His contract runs for another, I think, 3.5 years. And he's in the office every day. I get to engage along with my partners here regularly with him. So one, he's full on. Second, as I mentioned earlier, we have a really strong bench of design leaders working with him that I actually feel very good about on our men's business, on our women's business, on our home business. And then the third piece is we are regularly bringing in people from the outside. I mentioned Michael. We've also recently brought in designers in our accessory space to make sure that we have the right team to win today, the right team to win 5 years from now, and 10 years from now.
Okay, I have 2 final questions for you, and then we'll let everyone get their last dibs in. First, what's the biggest mistake you've made since you've been there? And second, what is your prediction for what's next? You know, for the company and also for the industry. Questions. You know, you got to end on a bang.
The biggest mistake, I think, you know, when you come from other companies, and also particularly having spent so much time at P&G, which is a very process-driven organization, and there are strengths to that, and then there are also pitfalls. I think it's probably wanting to implement some of these more operational discipline processes without spending enough time engaging the teams on the value of these processes, on how it would actually help them as opposed to look like more work or more complexity. And so, you know, the learning for me on this one is, and it's actually I think it's a good insight from the Japanese culture, sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. What does the future look like? Listen, for us, the future is bright. I mean, we're incredibly excited about where we are. You've seen our latest results. We are progressively building momentum step by step. Our Asian business is doing incredibly well across Japan, Korea, and obviously in this market. And if anything, this market for us is the tip of the spear, right? I mean, we've talked a lot about the customer in China, and I honestly believe the customer that is the most demanding in the world today, which I think used to be Japan, is actually now the Chinese customer. And so we're putting a lot of energy in making sure we understand him or her here. We're designing propositions that are going to resonate and win here, and then we use that as inspiration back to our European markets and to our US market. So
you're not worried about a trade war?
I am not. Everyone's worried about a trade war, right? And I think, you know, I'm not sure anyone comes out winning from a trade war. But at this point in time, we're focused on what we can control, right? And what we can control is managing the tariffs that have been implemented already, and we've actually been able to mitigate the impact of those. And then we're just focusing on executing our game plan with the eye on the customer.
How are you managing them?
The tariffs? So different ways. First of all, you know, we have a great, so about a third of our production comes from China. We have a great set of partners here. We actually had Dee on stage earlier. We work with her family and her team actually with the S.E.O. group. Great set of partners that just help us reduce cost, so we can address that. The second piece is we've been on a journey. It hasn't started with the tariffs, actually started earlier, of diversifying our manufacturing footprint such that no brand category combination has more than 30% presence in a given market. And then listen, the third is, which we have not had to resort to yet, but if the tariffs continue to expand, we may, which is reflecting the cost increases onto customers. But we will do everything we can before we get to that stage.
A prediction for the industry at large, not just for you?
For me, the future is bright as long as we don't fall in love with technology and we stay focused on the customer. It was fascinating just listening to the different sessions, which I thought were awesome. So congratulations to you and your team for this amazing event. Sometimes we can fall in love, and we've fallen into that trap with the technology. You know, I remember 3D TVs, right? And I bought a 3D TV and I actually never watched a film 3D on my TV. And I don't think 3D TV went anywhere, right? And yet it was the rage a few years ago. And I think so for us is to really stay true to the customer we're serving, the experience we want to give them, and technology being an enabler as opposed to being an endpoint.
Okay. With that, any questions? Now everyone's just like, time to end. I actually think that was a very good note to end on.
You asked all the tough questions.
No, I think that was a great note to end on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.